A hot button issue, an issue that gets a lot of attention, and rightly so. It's supposed to. And that's the idea of social justice, and we talk a lot about it nowadays. Church, in church, out of church, public media, everything else. And I think it's right and it's good and it's exciting. You know, a lot of people talked about this generation being more sensitive about social justice than previous generations, and that's good. But like anything good, it comes with complications, and I won't say a dark side, but it comes with complications. And one of the things about anything that's culturally relevant, culturally popular, is that it gets simplified. And when things get simplified, errors happen. Here's one. I think by social justice, what we're talking about really is that justice needs to have social implications, right? In other words, justice is what is done to an individual, right? So let's say you have someone that's guilty of committing or accused of committing a crime. Justice is making sure that that person is not held guilty if they in fact didn't do it, right? So that if they're innocent, they're treated as innocent. When we say social justice, what we mean is justice to the individual is reflected in society, right? So in the social framework, the social way, the way people relate to one another in businesses, in law, in just public space, how people are talked to, all the social frameworks around a person, right? So you have the individual, but then you have the social framework. So justice is what happens to an individual case by case. Social justice is changes in the social structure, right, that allow for or encourage justice or secure justice for individuals. So social justice means at least two things. One, that there's social implications when you fix a situation of injustice and make it just. It has implications for the rest of society. It also means that society is structured or framed in such a way to lead to justice. Now here's where the problem comes. Looking at an individual case of injustice and fixing that is one thing. But then trying to reconstruct society around the individual to make sure that you get justice is a different matter. It's far more complicated. Not that it shouldn't be done, and not that it doesn't have to be done, but we can't simplify it as to say, here's an instance where an individual is treated unfairly, therefore how do we have to restructure society to make sure that doesn't happen again? And the reason I think that's dangerous, is potentially dangerous, is because involved in that social structure are not just the individual, right, who might be being treated fairly or unfairly, but there are all these other parts, and they're not incidental parts, that are part of how that person got treated. Well, what am I saying? Think about, if we look at things that are unjust, let's say minimum wage, right, and people in our economy. We look at one individual and go, this person should not be making so little money. They can't survive on that much money. Okay, that's unjust. But if we want the social justice picture, now we want to reframe the economy so that people like that make enough money. You understand? See the difference? One is the case, and the other is the framework around the person. Well, the case is understandable. It's engaging. It's motivating. I'm motivated if I see this one person that's poor, and I want that fixed. The problem is we take that energy about the injustice done to the person and we apply it to something far more complicated, like in a total socioeconomic order around that person. So, for example, we would say, I don't like that this person is treated this way or doesn't make enough money, therefore I want what? Increase minimum wage and more controls on jobs and more controls on wages. Maybe those are good, I don't know, but the point is, anytime you try to alter the framework around the person, you get what we call unintended consequences. So you may look to, and as an example, and I know the jury's still out on this one, you may want to raise the minimum wage. So the framework changes, and that way people in that situation improve. And yet, there's unintended consequences that come from, right, raising the minimum wage. So what happens is that decision to raise the minimum wage has a consequence over here. So then we write another regulation to fix the system so that bad things don't happen over there. And then there's unintended consequences from that. And so you get this spilling out of legislation to help fix the social situations around each one of these individuals that are hurt. And you get this extremely complicated, cumbersome bureaucracy trying to respond to individual cases of injustice. All right, if that's all complicated, I apologize. What I'm trying to say is, when we say social justice, we have to be very clear what we mean by it. And I think if we simplify, we simplify what we mean so that what we're saying is, I want the best for one person. And we have to be careful that we don't try to alter the entire social structure around each case. Maybe in some cases that is important, and on race issues. Issues like, for example, structural racism or institutional racism. That's what they're talking about, is that social framework around each individual case. And I'm not saying those don't have to be fixed, they do. But you have to calculate the fact that when you change something as complex as a socioeconomic context, environment, whatever words you want to use, that it's going to have unintended consequences. And our food production, our electrical production, our industries, our jobs, those have all produced improvements technologically, improvements medically, improvements socioeconomically. People have gotten jobs. Those socioeconomic conditions touch everything. So if you go tweaking that, you have to be able to accept all the unintended consequences that come out of it. So I don't like the idea that we just toss around the term social justice. I'd rather, not that we shouldn't address it, but I don't think we should toss around it easily. As if I find one person in trouble, there's an easy social justice fix, and we can fix society to get that done. That takes some studied thought without creating problems that are larger than maybe the one we were trying to solve.